Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to what I believe will be a really fascinating discussion about quantum computing. Thank you all for taking some time. Hopefully a couple of you were able to grab a sandwich from wherever you are. Despite my background, I am saying hello to you from New York City, where our offices are. And Marc, who is our distinguished guest, is dialing in from France. So Marc, welcome. And Marc, I was really thrilled to do this conversation with Marc because Marc leads technology innovation for Accenture. And so really has been on the cutting edge right now and over the past number of years in what are the new technologies that are coming from the entrepreneurial community and from large corporates that are going to have an impact on all of our lives going forward. So Marc has been with Accenture 22 years. He did a stint before that at IBM, and he is a mathematician and also a programmer. So Marc, welcome. Excited to have this discussion with you, as I said today. So we are not going to give you a tutorial about quantum computing. There are other places you can do that. What we want to do is talk about why is quantum computing important and what should you care about today for your business. And so from our perspective, which is really looking at the world and the economy from an economic development lens, this discussion is really timely because now that there seems to be an end to COVID with the first vaccines being given, what we're turning our focus to is how are we going to build an economy out of the devastation that's been wrought by the various shutdowns and the problems with COVID. And so we think that quantum computing has some really interesting potential to create jobs, drive revenue, et cetera, and be an important engine for the economy. And so I was really thrilled to be able to spend the next hour with Marc talking about that and how that is possible. So the basis of kind of the underpinning for our discussion is a really interesting report that Accenture took some forethought and started asking these questions actually in the middle of COVID, but to sort of set us up now for a really interesting report to talk about as we come out of COVID. And I'll let Marc talk to you a little bit about the research. We put in the chat or the Q&A a link to the report for any of you that want to take a look at it now or afterwards. So Marc, let's turn it over to you and let's start with the research that you guys just published about quantum and kind of what are some of the key conclusions and insights from that report.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. And first of all, thanks for inviting me to this event. Yeah, happy to share this research that we've done. So this is a research that we've conducted over May and June timeframe. I would say like before we all got locked down. And we've done a survey across 250 leaders from major companies in New York City and around. And while we were looking at leaders, I mean, with companies with revenue more than $500 million. And the research were really focused on the current and future quantum demand and adoptions, as you said, and what is the talent requirements and the overall impact that we believe quantum computing will have on New York City and Metro. And what we find is that, which is really staggering, but I was not surprised, to be honest with you, is the GDP increase that will be provided by quantum computing in the next 10 years is going to be around like $332 billion, which is huge. But what is even more interesting for all of us here is that more than 95,000 people, net new job, I mean, will be created, which is pretty amazing. And so if you, again, this 10 years time frame. Now, if we reduce that to 5 years, I'm talking about $113 billion of GDP increase, 5 years, and then 57,000 new jobs by the next 5 years. So I think it's pretty amazing. And what was really good about
it, those are figures for New York State. That's the potential.
That's right. Yeah, New York State.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about the report. That's for New York State.
That's cool. And then I think what's very interesting is that I think we have a majority of our respondents, like 97% of them, were pretty optimistic on the quantum computing benefits. And they really believe at 79% of them that they will increase investment into spending into quantum computing, which I think is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So one statistic that I thought was really particularly interesting was that the majority of the respondents thought that quantum computing was going to have more impact on their business than artificial intelligence. Because right now, obviously, there's been so much attention put on artificial intelligence, the tools that people are now using with that. Why is that? Like, what is it about quantum computing that is going to surpass what today is seen as the cutting edge artificial intelligence?
I love the question, Maria. And I would say like probably two things. Number one thing is that artificial intelligence has been there for decades and decades, and people have been using it and everything. So, machine learning, the expert system, semantic network, and all these things. So people get used to it. And we've seen like the progression of artificial intelligence, like it's a steady progression, but it's not really, there was a breakthrough when we did like deep learning and everything. But since then, I mean, we're just like, it's steady progression.
Mm-hmm.
Quantum computing is a breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
Because quantum computing will help us to solve problems that nobody has been able to solve today. And we talk about what we call the complexity of the problems is funny because we talk about NP complex problems, which are so complex that you could put like the supercomputer of the world, it would not be able to solve it. And so you're going to need to have the power of quantum computer to be able to solve that. And when I say solving it, is that it's important to solve that in a reasonable time frame, which is like probably would be like a day or 2 days, even a week would be pretty good. And if you think like some of the problems we're talking about, classical computer would not even be able to solve that in, let's say, 100 years. That is a breakthrough, and this is why it's going to be so important.
Okay, so let's delve into that.
Okay.
And again, the report. The numbers were higher than actually I expected. You had about 34% of the respondents said they're investing today in quantum computing, and 51% said that they're going to be investing within a year, which is a pretty short time frame.
Yep.
So talk about, in terms of what you're seeing, how are companies using quantum today? So that's 34% that's investing today. Like, what are they doing?
They're doing so many things. And in fact, it's exactly what I was saying is that they're trying to crack the nuts on very complex problems they have not been able to solve today. So let me give you an example. In the life science industry, one of the big problems that company has, and specifically in pharmaceutical industry, is around drug discovery. If you think about drug discovery, and to make it overly simplistic, it's all about Lego block. You try basically to build a new molecule to build a new drug, but to build this molecule, you need to have a stability. And to build this stability, then you need to simulate the molecule. Until now, we've been able to simulate the molecule in 2 dimensions on a very big mainframe. Not good enough. We want to do that in 3 dimensions, but then we need a bigger computer, quantum computer. So drug discovery is going to be a big topic for quantum computer. And by the way, if you look at COVID, we believe there's going to be a huge acceleration in quantum computing, for example, to find basically the new vaccine and everything. So this is a good example. Let me give you another example. Financial services, and I think it interests very much the New York State. Okay, if you look at financial services, there's like company like JP Morgan Chase. They work with IBM on their Q platform, and what they do is that they work on testing algorithm and application that could be beneficial in portfolio management as well as fraud detection. That is pretty cool. Fraud detection is so complex that even like a big mainframe would not be able to handle it, especially if you want to do that real time. Let me give you another example. Automotive industry, big one, Volkswagen Group. They're working on generative design, for example, to create like new design of batteries, for example. And they're doing that using quantum computers. They're also doing this for optimization of traffic flow, in their GPS environment. Quantum computing again. So it goes on and on.
Okay. Is logistics logistics
and
material sciences or other areas? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
What are some of the use cases in logistics?
Yeah, it could be a very simple, the sales rep program, when you have basically a sales representative that need to go to different points and you need to optimize that. Well, when you have like 5 cities, you can manage it. 10 cities starting to be much more complex. And the problem is that the complexity gets exponential. And because it goes exponential, then those big computers cannot do that today, but quantum computer can do that. And I think this is exactly what we say. There's really 3 things that quantum computer we're going to be able to do today. Optimization, so supply chain, logistic, all these things. Machine learning, the power of machine learning for data, for different type of algorithm. And the other one is sampling, delivering sampling and new data and so forth.
Okay. So if you think about where the investments are being made, right, both by big companies and small companies, how are things going to change? So where are the investments? Presumably there's a lot of investment being made today in the actual quantum computer itself and the qubits, et cetera.
Yes.
And then there's going to be a software component to it because you're going to have to like do the readout of things. So do you have a sense of where that balance is today in terms of where most of the dollars are going? And then, in 5 years and 10 years, how do you expect that to shift?
So let's set the frame, Maria, if I may. So if you look at the big number, okay, we're talking about around $22 billion worldwide is invested in quantum computing today. Mm-hmm. And when I say $22 billion, it's like this is eventually mostly government funding, okay, a bit of private, but it's really.
And so that's $22 billion in research.
That's right. Okay. And okay. And then companies also are investing. And then what you see is that there's like three types of investments. There's investment on the hardware, as you said. There's the investment on the software platform. So the software development kit, so to be able to program those machines. And there's going to be investment also on the solutions that companies like Accenture or other companies are investing in building. Okay. And so you have also investment that has been done also by VCs, and this is roughly $1.2 billion. And that's excluding China. It's a bit difficult to know exactly how much China is spending on this, okay? All right, anyway, but what's really interesting is that if you look at the QC market, the quantum computing market in the US and the investment that's been done, the market, like US has been investing about $1.2 billion, which is pretty significant numbers if you think about it, okay? And at the time, I mean, the estimates, they show that their belief was the estimate for a quantum computing market in the US was worth only $300 million in 2019. Our survey shows that it's going to be much more. So we feel that it's clear that the investment that is done right now, it's pretty low compared to the value that we could get out of this new technology. And there's definitely some effort that needs to be there, that needs to be done. But by the way, US is not any worse than other countries. It's like if you look at the 5 top countries that are investing in quantum computing, it's USA, it's Canada, it's Europe. Europe, like the continent, Israel and Japan. That's where we are.
Okay. And from a timing perspective, what people are saying is that we're really, what's got people's interest is, to date, or up until the last couple of years, it's really been research in academic labs, very theoretical. And that we're at the point of moving from that theoretical research from an academic lab to more the engineering phase. Yes. And then we're just in the very early days of moving from engineering to actual products. So if you can pull out your crystal ball here, let's talk about when do you think we're going to be out of that engineering phase fully and sort of into much more of a product focus, or where the balance is going to shift from tinkering to actually using?
So fantastic question, Maria. And I would say that the reason why Accenture started on quantum computing like almost 4 years ago is that because those quantum computers, came out of their labs, we've been investing in it. I know that we have our friends from IBM probably listening to us. They've been investing for more than 15 years, like Microsoft as well, D-Waves. It's a long investment. Now, until there, whereas all those quantum computers were sitting in some ivory tower, and even Accenture and those companies, consulting companies with a hard time to access this. Now, fortunately, a few years ago, they started to put that available to us through VPN connection as an infrastructure as a service, and then we could connect to those machines. A little bit like more than 60 years ago when we could access to the big mainframe. Now, on top of that, what we see is that companies like OneQubit or QCware and everything have started to build software development kit so that we could program those machines, not using the assembly language, but using like abstracted language like Python or C and everything. With this, it's time to invest in quantum computing and to do the real deal. What I used to say is that I don't care about quantum supremacy, Maria, to be honest with you. I'm more dealing with chemistry industry or supply chain optimization, the real tangible problems that we'll have to solve for our clients. And so you tell me that when it is time to invest in quantum computing and in the talents, and I would say it's now. The reason why it's now is that, first of all, we understand exactly what those machines could be doing. It's just a matter of adding more qubits, okay? So making those systems more capable of solving even bigger problems. Okay.
So most of the core academic problems have been solved.
Yes. I mean, it's like, if at least we can build the algorithm to be able to solve it. We cannot, so we can solve it in theory. Practically, the machine doesn't exist yet because we would need to have more qubits. But we can prepare, we can build the algorithm, okay? And then we can even use simulator. We don't need to have the real machine, but we can have simulators when we can run our algorithm so that we prepare. And when the machine is going to be ready, I use my algorithm, boom, it runs immediately. So I say it's time now to engage with mathematicians, with data scientists, so that they learn about quantum computing, the power of it, and so they can understand exactly how we can take a business problem and how we can map it to different class of problem. Is it optimization problem? Is it machine learning problem? Is it more sampling problem? And be able basically to build the algorithm.
So what I find really interesting about this industry is that what I'm hearing is that collaborations and partnerships are really going to be critical.
Yes.
And that there's an element of, even when you're designing the hardware, that understanding how that hardware is going to be used is going to have an impact on the actual construction of the hardware. So this is not like a silicone chip where once you make the chip, you toss it over the wall and can be used in multiple different ways. There is I guess the word is refinement that's going to happen based on the use case. And so thinking about, and I sort of go back to the kind of the strength of the New York region, we have deep, obviously, financial services and pharma. How should those industries think about collaborating with the developers of the quantum computing technology, software, et cetera?
So first of all, Maria, you surprised me because you seem to know much more quantum computing than I thought you knew, in fact, initially, because you are absolutely right. Every quantum computer has a specific architecture. And in fact, I mean, we work with partners like IBM, I mean, Rigetti, Fujitsu, they all have their different approach, whether they want to use superconducting approach, whether they want to use trap ion, whether they want to use adiabatic or annealing and everything. Everyone has their different architecture. That means that everyone also have the number of qubits that is supported by, or that they use basically on this architecture. And that means that also all those architectures are really different in terms of what type of problems they can solve. You know, if you look at Gates architecture could solve many different type of problems, while annealer would solve optimization, machine learning, and sampling essentially. But going back to your question is that what companies need to do and what type of partnership they need to have. Number one partnership they need to have is that they need, first of all, to understand the ecosystem around them. And I'm talking about the ecosystem in a wide aspect. First of all, the academies, okay, which university you want to partner with and how you can connect with those data scientists of the future to understand what is quantum computing. And by the way, quantum computing is leveraging a mathematical theory that's called the graph theory. So you need to have guys that are really good at graph theory and take basically a business problem, translate that into graph theory. So you need to work with those people, those scientists in academies, mathematicians as well. Now, the second type of people you need to have is obviously, I mean, the people that are building the machine. But, you know, the machine is that it's very important, but I think what's even more important is the software development kit, because you hardly won't touch the machine. What you need to understand is that is this layer. And that's where you need to understand the ecosystem in terms of software and all the partners you want to work with. The IBMs, I talk about 1 qubit, I talk about QCware, and you're going to have more and more. Those are the ones that are going to help you to unveil the capability of these machines.
So there's a relevant question from the audience, which I'm going to just sort of throw in here right now.
Okay.
And I'll just invite the audience, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. And this one comes from Dana Enger from State Farm. Hello, Dana. We were just on a panel together recently, so I'm glad you could join us. And her question is about, so are you expecting, or should a big corporate expect that they're going to have their own quantum computer, or are they going to be using it in somebody's clouds? And we know, for example, that IBM has an interesting cloud offering to allow companies to start to play with technology. But again, with your crystal ball in hand, as you project forward, which is it going to go? Should companies be thinking about our own, or going to a cloud, or I'll have my own for certain use for certain uses and not use cases or problems, but not for others?
Okay, it's a great question, and thanks for asking these questions. My view is that the view of Marc Carrel at Accenture, I would say is like, I would not build my own quantum computer. First of all, you understand that it requires a lot of investment. People have started to do that like
Right.
17, 20 years ago. So I think you're late if you think about building a quantum computer now. What I would do definitely, I would leverage the ones that are already available through cloud. And by the way, I mean, we're going to see like crypto technology and everything. I mean, so that through VPN connection and everything, we'll be accessing those computers. And this is what we're going to do. I'd say what's going to be very important for you, very important, is that to look at the different problems in your business you have and coming up with a classification of those problems. Which type of classification or class of problems are related to optimization or other type of problems. And so that you can choose what's going to be the best architecture in terms of quantum computer you need to leverage and the SDK as well. With that, you know, I think you're pretty safe. But again, I would encourage you more to use cloud, and especially, I mean, with the 5G connections and all these things, I mean, things going to be faster, and we get the throughput of messages going to be bigger. And so, yeah, no, don't build your own quantum computer.
It's certainly to start. That's a good way to start. And sort of to dip your toe in the water is to because I think it's fair to say that the developments of on the hardware side have been going very quickly and are expected to accelerate. And so to try to stay ahead of that, let the big players, I would say, let the big players do that, and then focus on using on testing initially, you know, using the technology. So as you think about, and again, this sort of ties to a question that we just got from the audience. So you're sitting, let's take, we got a number of people from financial services. You're sitting in a large financial services firm.
Yes.
Where should you start? Like, what should you, what is the, if you had to pick like the first use case, but let's set aside cryptography, right? Because we're going to come back, that's a separate question. But outside of cryptography, if you think about a large financial institution, like what's the first problem they should think about going after? And then some real practical thoughts around what should they do, right? I mean, should they go out and buy a piece of software? Like, what should they do?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, what should be the focus? And obviously the focus can vary, I mean, from different financial organizations or companies. But one thing that we know is that one thing that they would like to know is that they would like to have this crystal ball to understand exactly where their portfolio in terms of share will go. And then the complexity is that how many shares you have to in your portfolio and what's the time frame. So all this portfolio risk optimization is going to be a breakthrough. And with quantum computer, we hope that basically we're going to be better at predicting exactly the value of those portfolio. Now, so I told about this one. Now, how you would start about quantum computer if you're a bank? I would say that first of all, I mean, it's all about education. We need to educate your people. And the way we need to do that is that we have workshops, you know, it's like, and I don't want to sell Accenture here. I mean, IBM, like Deloitte, everyone has a fantastic workshop to explain in very simplistic terms what is quantum computing for the business people. Okay, and then we have also an education of what is quantum computing for more the mathematician or the data scientists, so they understand exactly how they can work together. Then the second thing that we need to do is that we need to sit down together and then identify some of the key use cases that would be something, a good potential for a pilot. Okay. Then with this, what we can do is that we can formulate the use case or the project we want to do into the algorithm that we want to test. And then after that, once we know the algorithm that we want to test, which is a mathematical algorithm, then we need to look at what is going to be the best software development kit to implement that, so program it, and then where we're going to be implementing it. And then we don't have at this time to invest in a quantum computer. We can just use a simulator. You know, many companies like IBM or D-Wave and everything are providing a simulator, which is a software simulator that you just run your stuff to see if it works, you know, like a debugger almost. And then if you're happy with that, then you're going to buy an hour of time on a machine that you're going to be able to leverage to really test that in real time.
So it strikes me, particularly when it comes to risk, which there is particularly in financial services, there's a vested interest in the system being stable. That risk might actually be an interesting area for collaboration between several financial institutions and developers of software and hardware.
That's a very good point, Maria. And I think what we see is that we're going to see more and more also companies that are also collaborating with each other on some topics. Like we see also like banks that are working also, they're investing in research scientists. They hire them and they start basically building like research paper related to implementation using quantum computing of some of their tricky algorithms that they want to have, like they illustrated some use cases. But sometimes they do that together with other banks as well, and they do some shared IPs and everything. So I think collaboration between industries, between organizations, as well as with academia is going to be key, and with the partners as well. The partners like the IBM, the D-Wave, and so forth.
So I asked you to set aside cryptography because I wanted to save a question for cryptography. So that is the area, I think there is an expectation that the cryptography of the internet and the web is going to be broken at some point, right? Yep. And that, people need to start planning for that. So what should people do around that? And just give our audience a sense of what the risks are. Where are we in the process? This is probably not in the next, by 2021, but how should people start to think in particular, because data is so valuable, protecting the data and, as quantum computing breaks the cryptography that we have today.
So good question, Maria. And one of the most famous algorithm for encryption is called the RSA algorithm. It's based on primitive factors and everything. I'm not going to delve into this, but and this is one that we're using for crypto algorithm across many of our systems. Now I have a bad news and I have a good news. All right. The bad news is that according to research that have been done on quantum computing, we believe that this RSA algorithm could be broken in 8 hours of calculation with a quantum computer. That's a bad news. Now, the good news is that it would require a quantum computer with 20 million qubits so far, if you want to do that. So that's the good news, because the 20 million qubits computer doesn't exist yet.
We're far away. We're a few years away from that. Yeah. That's
right. We still have some time. And by the way, Maria, nobody can tell exactly. Is it going to be 5 years, 10 years, less? Nobody knows really. And I would not try to give you a number here. But I think what's important to understand is that the risk from future threats like quantum is, first of all, time consuming and very costly. Okay. The other thing that is important to understand is that the NIST organization, that developed basically this National Institute for Standard Technology, they define basically what's going to be the new standard for cryptography. They have defined a standard by 2022 that should be a quantum safe approach. Okay. And so I think what company needs to do is that they need to, and that will be ready by 2022, the standard will be defined. And obviously there's a bunch of companies that are building basically quantum safe approach. I mean, to be able to rebuild your cryptography algorithm so that basically you're going to be quantum safe. Now you get 2 years, and what you're going to do in 2 years? I'd say that probably you need to do 3 things, just 3. Number 1, you need to conduct a technical assessment of your environment. So first of all, you need to assess the risk and exposure to quantum threats of your data, of your application, the one that are the most risky and the more costly basically to remediate. Now, and the second thing is that you need to design the control in terms of security. So what are the controls you're going to put in place, to understand exactly based on the classification and the assessment you've done, where you're going to have to deploy basically additional control and the one that's going to be, compliant with an NIST. And then what you'll have to do is that you'll have to pilot the implementation of the top control and also create a technical roadmap, because eventually, the standard will evolve, but that's what you need to do. Now, you have time to do that, the company that can help you to do this. And also, I think what's going to be more and more important is that to understand that at one point of time, what will be important is that, you create kind of this agility in your IT environment. Okay, so whatever new crypto algorithm that you're going to implement, your application are kind of almost like disconnected from it, it's like, and it will be something that will be more and more important, because eventually this will evolve. We talk about quantum computing today. Tomorrow there might be another technology that will supplement this, and so we need to have applications that could be agile related to this cryptography problem.
So two questions which are connected to your most recent comments. One is, what is a quantum-inspired algorithm? And so I'll let you address that one, then we'll go to the second one.
Okay, so quantum-inspired algorithm is really an algorithm that is going to be really a good fit for quantum computers, and there's like different type of characteristic for those algorithms that can solve like problems that are complex. And when we talk about the complexity of the problems, is that people need to understand that most of the problems are supported by what we call parameters. And the complexity of the problem is coming from the fact that the more parameters or variables you add to the problem, the complexity of the problem is not linear complexity, but as I said, is an exponential complexity. And linear complexity can be dealt pretty well with classical computing, like mainframes and everything, while exponential complexity, they can't do that. And so that's where basically we need to use a quantum computer. So those kind of algorithm is exactly the one that are fit for this kind of machines.
Okay. The other one was related back to the cryptography conversation, which is it true that there are actors, state and otherwise, that are currently downloading information off the web that's encrypted, putting it in a storage device somewhere, and waiting until the cryptography can be broken? So A, is there a belief that that is happening? And B, is there anything that you can do today to protect that data that will be broken in the future?
Okay, so it's a good question. There might be some people doing that. I'm not aware of them, but like, who am I? I mean, to say there are none. So number one. Number two is that, do we believe that eventually, again, it's all about, do we believe that a quantum computer will break cryptography algorithm? Again, we're working on the fact that we will build basically all the elements and the new algorithm and the capability to avoid this. So I think it's a bit the Y2K discussion that we had with Cobalt. You remember at that time? I think this is we learn a lesson from this, and I think this is something that we're doing, and we have time to do that. Again, I was talking about breaking the RSA algorithm in 8 hours, and there's other type of algorithm, not only RSA. I mean, that provides cryptography today in the IT environment. Today, I mean, the machine that we need, okay, would have to basically break or implement like an algorithm could build short algorithm that is just not there yet, and it will take some more time. So I think we have time, and then we need to work this out. So I'm hugely positive. I'm pretty optimistic, and then from the discussion I had with many companies that are really working on these topics, we feel pretty comfortable that we're going to be able to avoid a big problem.
Okay. All right. So be concerned, but not that concerned.
Yeah.
So now let's switch to the pipeline and talent. So you've talked a little bit about what people need to start thinking about doing, some collaboration, some really mapping of their environment.
Yes.
So what are the skills that are needed here? As you think about your manager, and particularly on the IT side, what are the skills that are going to be the most valuable that are going to be necessary for quantum? I
think so. Well, let's say that we should think about 3 types of skills. The hardware skills are the people that would be eventually building the quantum computer. But we said we're going to leave that to the specialist. And then for the business organization,
but that's a lot of physics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the hardware side, it's hardcore physics.
Yeah. Look behind me. I mean, this is a refrigerated tower, by the way. I mean, there's also thermodynamic thinking and all these things. I mean, not only that. Okay. All right. So we're going to leave that to the specialists, those people that are building these things. Okay. And they invested so much time. I mean, they deserve, to have their machines accessed through cloud. Okay. So forget about those guys. So we won't talk about the hardware people. I want to talk about 2 other types of people. The mathematicians or data scientists, those are the key guys, because they need to take a business model, understand a business problem, and then model that into a mathematical algorithm that we're going to be sending to the machine, number 1. And number 2 is the programmer, the software programmer, the guys that really understand how you can program basically mathematical algorithm using graph theory. and using different type of abstracted language like Python, like C, and so forth onto this. Now, I have to say that fortunately, companies like D-Wave or Microsoft or IBM or Rigetti, they provide already platforms very much through kind of open source that people can access to so that they can get educated already. And I think this is just fantastic because people can learn from it. But I think that, yeah, if you want to invest in mathematician, retrain your data scientist, and get good software to understand exactly how they can program those machines.
So one of the questions was, is coding dead? And the answer is absolutely not, becoming more important, I think is the summary for that.
No. One thing, Maria, one thing that I want to say, I didn't mention also, is that a lot of people believe that quantum computer will replace any computing power of the world. It is wrong. You need to understand that a quantum computer would be more like a coprocessor of a machine that is a classical mainframe. So your classical mainframe will continue running, and then when it's going to be a very complex problem that the classical computer cannot do, they'll send it to the quantum computer, who will do basically the solving problem, send it back to the classical computer, and that's you get your result. Okay?
Right. So there's the quantum skills, there's the programming skills, and then there's the communication between the two. Yeah. This was a very technical question that popped up here, which is the question was, a coprocessor like a GPU?
Yeah, I like the analogy. It's a little bit like this. You know, even like when I was very young, 30 years ago, I was programming on my Z80 or the 8088 from OD80 from Intel. There was this coprocessor with 8087 that was very good to do floating operation. That's exactly the same. GPU is massively parallel. They can do things that some processor cannot do so well. So that's exactly what you're doing. And if you look at quantum computing, this is exactly what it is. It's a massive parallelism approach that helps them basically to solve problems very fast. So yes, it would be a good analogy. I like that.
Okay, good. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the early stage world market where we're at. We've got a number of venture capitalists who are listening in. So this is really sort of for questions for them. So a lot of the investment in the hardware takes big dollars, may or may not be appropriate for the venture side. But as we talked about, there is some software. So what opportunities are you, if you're sitting there as a venture capitalist who's got smaller dollars typically to launch an early stage company, what should they be thinking about in terms of where are the opportunities? Should it be, should they think about general tools, more specific tools? As you think about where the innovation is going to come from on the early small company side, where is that coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think if you look at the investment by segment, you look at quantum hardware, quantum software, and the applications, what we see is like the vast majority of the investment have been done so far on the quantum hardware. And we see now that it's shifting a little bit more into quantum software and application. I think I would say like maybe the future is going to be really, because quantum hardware has progressed a lot. Okay, so what we need to look at, and I think there's more investment that we need to do in quantum software and applications. And when I talk about quantum software, is that, we talk about integrated development environment. And for a lot of programmers, and I'm a programmer, Maria, for people, this is the environment where you're going to be able to write your code, to debug your code, to send it eventually basically to the cloud so that it gets to be tested or in simulator and everything. I think we could make an integrated development environment quantum safe or quantum enabled so that you can connect with a quantum computer like you would be connecting to a normal computer. I think that would be really cool. I think another type of integrated development environment we could look at is that a way that you can express a business problem and then helping you basically to generate the model, the mathematical model that you're going to be able to run on the quantum computer from the business problem that you have defined. This doesn't exist yet. You need to have mathematician, you need to have industry thinker to think about that stuff. But if you could automate that, and by the way, maybe generative design and artificial intelligence could help us to do that, well, that would be really cool. So there's something there. And then the last one is the solutions. Obviously, I mean, if you can build basically specific problems, I was talking about, drug discovery. If you look at thinking about a new drug discovery capability that would be powered by quantum computing, that would be really cool. If you think about generative design, for example, in the automotive industry, to be able to optimize your design based on characteristic and specification, but it's so complex that not a classical computing could do that in 1 hour, but a quantum computing could do that. Well, that would be really cool too. So there's also solutions that I think we should be investing into.
Yeah, and so it sounds like too, there are sector-specific quantum tools that will be needed, right? So there will be a need for a set of software that's just focused on drug design, which is solving a very different problem. So just as on the hardware side, you're going to have hardware specifically designed for a problem, it'll be the same on the software side, just given the complexity of things. You know, I'm not willing to throw hardware out completely for venture. Our first investment was in a hardware company, called Seek. But I mean, to your point about the big dollars, they are developing a tool, for example, to solve the problem of quality control on the qubit side. So there are probably opportunities. Would you agree there are opportunities that are enabling tools for sort of the bigger companies that are developing the core technology?
And Maria, I think the investment on Seek is a very good one. But let me explain to the audience a little bit what we're talking about here, because some people might not understand what we're talking about. If you look at a quantum computer, is a bit different than a normal computer, because we don't talk about bits here. We talk about qubits. All right. It's a bit different because a bit takes like value like 0 and 1, while a qubit can take like any value between 0 and 1. In fact, they have like different states called superposed states. And then we never know exactly what is the qubit is in terms of states until you look at it. And when you look at it, in fact, it doesn't give you exactly the number. It gives you a number which is associated to a probability. I think it would say, you know, Maria, I think I'm a 1, probability 90. All right, so this is probably the 1. And so the thing is, the big problem with quantum computer today is that the more you put qubits, and the qubits basically are connecting with each other, and basically they're influencing each other. It's called the entanglement phenomenon. That brings a lot of noise. And there is a noise between all those different qubits. And the noise itself, okay, is basically putting a lot of problems on the solution that you need to look at. So today, one of the biggest problems of hardware manufacturer of quantum computer is to eliminate this noise that you have when you put so many qubits. So the people that will invest into the companies that can eliminate this noise, obviously, I mean, it's going to be bought by many computing provider, and I think that's a great one. So just to give an example.
We're hopeful.
All right.
So and I also too, as we think about New York, that's an interesting area for New York on the hardware, parts of the hardware side. So I think no discussion today. We have to talk about COVID, right? Yeah. So we've talked a lot about where the prospects are for COVID. Sorry, the prospects for quantum. How has COVID affected the trajectory, the kind of maybe the kind of problems that are being solved? How has COVID impacted quantum?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And first of all, COVID. So if you look at some of the research that's been done around the drug discovery, that's the vaccine discovery for COVID, obviously quantum computing has been tested there. We've done some simulation and everything. So obviously, because there was like so limited time to come up with a new drug component, like a new vaccine component, and then we had to do so many tests, we felt that quantum computing was a good idea. And there was really some simulation that's been done there, and eventually more work than that. So we really believe that COVID is clearly an accelerating factor to use quantum computing. Now, when we did the survey, it was very interesting, 25% of the respondents, so you remember like 250 people, say COVID will accelerate QC adoptions, like quantum computing adoptions. Now, 50% say that they believe that COVID will delay the adoption of quantum computing. I don't know exactly why they said that, probably because they said like, eventually quantum computing is not ready yet to be finding basically what's the vaccine. And maybe people will say, well, you know, quantum computing is not ready yet because we needed that now and we didn't get the result we were expecting. So maybe we need to wait for some time. But I think the most important things to look at is that 50%, almost close to 50% of the respondents say that COVID will negatively impact their ability to screen for quantum computing talents. And I believe it's true. The reason why I believe it's true is that obviously, you know, like especially young talents, and my kids eventually, you know, like young mathematicians, they feel really connected to this pandemic. They want to solve it. And the people that know about quantum computing, they definitely knocked at the door of pharmaceutical industry to try to see how they can help. And eventually they hook and basically working there. Well, it's less talents that you can available, but I think that they're going to be definitely an impact there.
Okay. And so how can city and local governments speed either the research? Are there some policy things that government can do to, and I think specifically in New York, could be done to ensure that we get our fair share, if not more than our fair share of this industry as it grows? Because you did mention at the beginning,
yes,
the potential for $332 billion over 10 years and 95,000 jobs, 95,000 jobs. Those are big numbers to pay attention to. But what are some suggestions?
So 4 suggestions. I have 4 suggestions. Okay, number 1, you need to create specialized training and tools for developers and data scientists. You remember we talked about that.
Right.
All right. Number 2, incentives, taxes, subsidize, and everything to support companies to invest into quantum computer, whether they invest in the hardware, in the software, and the solution. Number 3, they need to create a quantum computing ecosystem in New York City. Attract people. I mean, it's great, like you have IBM not so far, but you need to attract more. I mean, it's like not more quantum computing hardware company, but as well as like software. That is very important because that's how you're going to grow the ecosystem. And I think the last one, which is also a very important one, is that you need to specialize college and university with a curriculum related to quantum computing training. It's very important. I mean,
so new curriculum, yeah.
Yeah, new curriculum, absolutely.
Yeah. And just to put a plug for, it's one of our portfolio companies, but New Lab in the Brooklyn Navy Yard before COVID was doing some of your number 3, which was creating a quantum ecosystem, and had a series of events in partnership with a number of different people, IBM, the Canadians from Waterloo, the Quantum Institute up there, to try to bring together the ecosystem. Because I agree with you that having a sort of in a growing industry in particular, like-minded people coming together and bumping into each other is key. Interesting things come out of that.
Absolutely.
So we've got a very engaged audience, excited to see. I've been weaving some of the questions in. It's a good sign that you're all listening. Let's see, I'm going to go through these here. I think one from Steve Berg, we sort of touched on. Will New York be a center for quantum? We hope so. And I think hopefully that Marc's ideas answered your question there. Let's see. Here's a more of a technical question. How can we govern and secure quantum computing apps if it's the fastest system in the ecosystem? Meaning, do we need security quantum computing apps to monitor customer quantum computing apps?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that one. Maybe we need to have a quantum computer, to be able to monitor in real time any fraud or breach and all these things. Maybe that's the thing that we could see, like robots, to manage all the robots and everything. That would be a good one. I haven't thought about that. That's a good question. Okay.
All right. Let's see. All right, here's another more technical question. Suppose we get a good business problem and implement an algorithm. Should we use quantum computers to solve problems in real time, like a web request, or should it be more about scheduling time to perform our calculations in batches? And presumably that's somewhat tied to the specific problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's like there's going to be two things. I mean, what we see right now is that we might be using quantum computers like both in real time as well as using batch mode, like what we say. And when I was giving some example like generative design, like today, a lot of new evolution of computer-aided design manufacturing systems and everything that using generative design to be able to help you with so much parameters to find basically the best frame, like in terms of weight, in terms of stability, solidity, and everything that requires so many calculations. That can be done in real time by quantum computer. Now, in other type of things, maybe some logistic thinking and maybe coming up with very complex roadmap, or it could be, for example, advertisement. You want to run a campaign on the advertisement, and then you want to look at what's going to be the best logistic possible, where you need to put your ads, who's going to advertise this. You could be running that in batch mode so that you know exactly what's going to happen. So I think that both ways are good. we'll have to figure out exactly what could be available.
Okay. Another question about an industry where quantum may have an impact, specifically sustainability,
Yes.
And food and agriculture.
Yes.
Food waste, distribution, carbon footprint. So the question is really, how will quantum computing impact that industry, food and ag?
I think it will. I think it will big time. I mean, if you look at, let me give you some example related to carbon footprint and eventually how we can manage this. I mean, moving to different type of energies like energy transitions and moving to more electric, so hydrogen and everything. I mean, one of the big problem of all those new type of energy is the grid. It's like how you're gonna manage the grid, and it's grid management is a complex optimization problems that need to be solved. Obviously, if you have tools like quantum computing, then we'll be migrating, faster into this new type of energy, and that's going to leverage this. Food distribution is a good one as well. Everything that's going to be about matchmaking, algorithm of distribution, optimization, everything, quantum computer will play a big topic here. When we discussed Maria yesterday, I gave another example that people tend not to think about. But I have to say that algorithm is absolutely everywhere. And last time that I was listening to a documentary about organ transplant, I got really excited about how algorithms are done for organ transplantation. When someone has an accident, and then basically you need to transplant one of his organs to a receiver, you have like a time frame to do this transplantation. And then here is that matchmaking is all about it. And so the better match you can do based on the number of parameters you have on the organ and the parameters you have on the receiver, the less drug for anti-rejection of the organ you'll be able to give to the receiver. Meaning that you probably save the life of that person, because most of the people, they are not from the organ they take, but from more the anti-reject from the organ they get, like all these drugs. So, and that problem, we found it very interesting. And in fact, we started to work on that. We have patents on it, which is really exciting. And then we have repurposed the program that was existing on a very classical machine into quantum computer. So I give you another example. All those algorithms, I think people need to think about it. We need to think that nothing is impossible now. And things that we never thought possible, because we say like, well, there's a time frame, we can't do that because there's so many parameters and this is not going to be possible. Yes, it's going to be possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A little bit more of a technical question, but interesting. So what problems can be solved with, because as these quantum computers scale with the number of qubits, the question is, what problems can be solved with a 50 to 60 qubit system versus, say, 1,000 qubit versus a million?
I love this question. All right. So first of all, I'm going to be very disappointing for a lot of people, is that the number of qubits obviously helps you to solve bigger problems. Okay, that's for sure. But the problem is that you can't say what typical problem you're going to solve on a 5 qubits or 50 qubits, because it really depends on the architecture that is underneath. Like, for example, if you look at annealing computers, they might be using more qubits than Gates computers on terms of architecture that use less qubits, but they can solve similar type of problems. So it's very complex to compare computers based on just the qubits, because you need to understand exactly underneath what is the architecture that we're using. Now, one of the most interesting architecture that—
So maybe you need a quantum computer to understand your quantum computing capacity.
No, but what's very interesting, Maria, is that there's an architecture that everyone agreed on. It's called the Gates architecture. Okay, that is try to mimic the gates that we have in normal classical computing electronics architecture into doing like computing gates, quantum gates. We believe that those kind of architecture are really future for a quantum computer. The reason why it's futuristic is that because not only you're going to be able to implement optimization problem or sampling or machine learning problem, but you might be able to implement many other classification problems that the three ones that I mentioned are dedicated for what we call annealer. And the Gates one will be able to solve many, many more problems. But obviously, Gates architecture are much more complex to implement than annealers today. And you see that the number of qubits on those architecture are far less than you see on annealing system. So I'm sorry, but if I would
There's
be able
not a
to
simple, there's not a simple in quantum.
no, there's not. I mean, I wish there is. I wish there is.
Quantum, there's never a simple answer.
No.
Another sort of more technical question. If you can just comment on the practical and technical scaling challenges, qubit stability, error correction, reading output, for applications that are not physics specific, like material sciences or cryptography.
No, I think it's a good it's a good question. And you see behind, I mean, it's like me, I mean, this refrigerating tower. I mean, the reason why we try to refrigerate basically a quantum chip is that we need to completely isolate it from its environment. Like no frictions, no vibrations, nothing. And the reason why basically, I mean, everything is kind of frozen is that because if everything is frozen, then nothing is moving. So basically, this is better. And so I think you said like something that is very important. When we talk about noise in the quantum computer, we call about decoherence of the qubits. And that's where they start to do whatever they want. And then they're not providing basically the right answer. So you see the complexity we're gonna have is that the more qubit, as I said, we're gonna use in the architecture, the more decoherence we can go to. So we have those companies like SIG that can help there, but we have also like those kind of environments like refrigeration tower that can help to isolate the environment. I think this is not sufficient. And what we'll see is that probably they're going to be a mix of technology, both software and both hardware that will solve the decoherence problem. Now, what's very interesting is that there are other companies, and you look at Fuji, for example, and Fujitsu, they're looking at completely different type of company architecture. They're looking at more CMOS. And the reason why they're looking at CMOS, they say like, we have so much experience on CMOS architecture that scale up that eventually what we're going to do is that we're going to build something that is look like a quantum computer that could be programmed like a quantum computer. It's not exactly a quantum computer, but it's close enough. But the big difference is that it's a bet they make. We believe that we're going to be able to scale it up much faster than other companies would do on betting on gates. Well, we'll see what's going to happen there. But I know that it's going to be a race is on this, and it's going to be very interesting to see what's happening.
So, Marc, this has been such an interesting conversation, but we're out of time, if you can believe it. The hour went fast. But I'm going to give you the last word, which is how can people learn more? And before I turn that over to you, with thanks, obviously, is just for the audience. Obviously, you know, as I mentioned at the outset, quantum computing is a very interesting area. We think it has great potential for New York, and so we at the Partnership Fund and Accenture, we are very interested in your ideas about what we can do in New York to attract more companies, encourage scientists to start companies, support them, et cetera. So please send your ideas. I think you probably all have at least many of you have my email at least, and we'll pass on to Accenture any ideas there. But last word, Marc, real quickly, 30 seconds. I mean, how can people learn more?
Also, so if you want to learn more, I mean, there's so much things out there on the web and everything. I told about companies like IBM, Microsoft, Rigetti, Fujitsu. I mean, they all provide develop an environment where you can even like start learning about it, start simulating your own algorithm. It's a little bit like artificial intelligence. There's a lot of open source community that are so crazy about it, and they want to share about their passion. So I think you can learn from there. Now, I mean, you have companies like Accenture, but not only Accenture. I mean, many of our friends like Deloitte and everything are providing also like those workshops, you know, education workshops, where we can educate business people as well as more like technical people and how to get to know about it, how to engage on this. So, I mean, I guess you have my email, or Maria will pass on your questions to me. I'm more than happy to meet with you, and then I can take you even through. So we've done something really cool. Let me tell you that before I close. We have worked with D-Wave to partner together and to explain how quantum computing works using extended reality. So if you go there, and we'll send you basically a link, and then that's basically how to demystify an immersive education through quantum computing with D-Wave. With this, thank you.
Wonderful. So, Marc, it's been a true pleasure. Great conversation with you.
Thanks, Maria.
And maybe we'll do it again. All right. Thank you all for attending, and have a safe holiday, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, Maria.